Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
The show is a proud media partner for the 11th Annual Media Excellence Awards, which are produced by Access Entertainment in Los Angeles, California. The Media Excellence Awards are recognized as the most influential awards show, honoring innovation and leadership in all things mobile entertainment, lifestyle, and technology. For more information on how to submit to these awards, please visit MediaXAwards.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Maya Middlemiss. She's the CEO of BlockSparks. Maya, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. You guys are doing some really interesting stuff kind of around blockchain and some other stuff that we'll talk about later. But maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Oh, okay. That's going back a long way. I'm from London originally.
Very cool.
So I grew up there, but I've been living in Eastern Spain for the last 10 years because I could, really. And we just moved out of London in search of a different lifestyle and kept going. I had the kind of work that I could take with me, which is incredibly fortunate and is now becoming more and more common.
Interesting. No, I think that's great. And actually, I was in Spain earlier in the year, in Madrid. It's beautiful. First time there. I loved it. I thought it was great. So I get why you moved there.
Yeah, it's a great culture, really, for family life. Yeah, we love it here, and I'm sure it'll be a long-term move, though. Maybe one day we'll try somewhere else. Who knows?
Interesting. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
Okay. Now this is going back into the dim and distant.
I love it. I love it.
Interestingly, I very nearly did a physics degree, which would have been a terrible mistake.
What made you want to take physics originally?
Well, I'm not sure that I ever especially wanted to. I think I was a product of, and I don't know whether this was specifically a UK thing, but certainly the 80s and single-sex education, there was very much a push for girls do science. Go into hard sciences, which I broadly agreed with in principle. But I think the way that things are assessed academically, if you're broadly good at a lot of stuff, but you tend to get the highest marks in the things that are objectively right or wrong. So it was, yes, obviously you should do maths and physics and things. And I'm sure I knew something wasn't right because I managed to spectacularly mess up my final exams and didn't go down that path that had been set out for me. And then I went traveling and did other things instead for a while and ended up going back and doing a psychology degree in my mid-20s, which was actually far more interesting, I think.
Okay. What made you want to take psychology then?
I think it was just more of a general curiosity about life and not being quite sure what I wanted to do at the end of it, but finally being ready to go onto that stage of my life and explore higher education. And I certainly didn't want to go back and do a science degree. Instead, I enjoyed, we were actually shared a department with the science people. So we just did experiments on them to see how stressed they were instead.
Interesting. Okay. That must have been quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it's funny, actually, looking back now, whenever I look at anything from current psychological literature, how different the study approach is and how much has changed, how much more data we have. Back in the day, we were trying to infer things about how the mind worked and how decisions were made and so on. And now you look at modern experiments in the same areas and they're just saying, oh, well, we just pop them in an MRI and this bit of the brain lit up. And sciences that were quite soft and social have now become far more data-driven and scientific and harder and objective. But hopefully coming out with similar conclusions that actually sometimes people came up with hundreds of years ago, but proves that human nature hasn't changed that much.
Interesting. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. Hey. So you also went to university and took some business. What did you take there and what made you do that as well?
Well, I did psychology because I was generally interested in people and life, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I did a lot of voluntary sector and community development type work, which was
very cool.
Sort of, save the world type work, which was interesting. Then I ended up working in market research for a while, and I studied part-time to get a business diploma just because it was a useful way to extend what I was doing and learning, but again, without any very clear goal in sight. I mean, by then I'd realized I was never going to be a physicist.
Okay,
so
sure.
That was fine. In fact, I remember joking about it once with somebody. It was actually my mother, who was a writer, and finally pushed me down this road career-wise a few years ago, and saying, I wish we'd picked that up when you were in school, but now you make a lot more money splitting infinitives than splitting atoms. And that was the way it was always going to be.
Interesting. So walk me through your career, maybe some career highlights along the way up until kind of what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I spent a long time working in market research fieldwork, which was very interesting.
Okay.
And it also gave me the opportunity to work flexibly from home when I had a young family, and then to decide to move my home to another country and things like that. But I was becoming more and more interested in the storytelling and content creation around that and the marketing of the business, and drifting more and more. We didn't call it content strategy then because it didn't really have a word, but it was telling the stories about what we were doing and getting to new audiences in different ways. Because I was then living in Spain, I wanted to put down some roots in the community where I was. And so I ended up pitching a column to the local paper. And so for several years, I wrote a column about technology and social media for the local English press. And drifted sideways into more journalistic work that way. And then eventually, after publishing a book about research fieldwork, it was kind of felt that bit of my life was done. And then I went full-time freelance writing for a while. And I loved freelancing. It was great. I loved the freedom of it and the flexibility. And I loved writing about all sorts of things. And I thought it'll be great to just be able to write about whatever I want, like travel and things like that. But then in terms of paying the bills, I realized that my best intersection of interest and skills lay in technology, fintech in particular, and there were some really interesting gigs coming that way that I was winning. And then I came across one about a blockchain cryptocurrency project a year or so ago. I didn't know much about at the time. It was actually about one of the big scandal Ponzi scheme things. We don't talk about that anymore. But it was it was fascinating, though. I sort of, from a journalistic point of view, I was intrigued by why so many people had been suckered by this thing and dug into it further. It was clear what was wrong with it from a business and financial point of view, but why were so many people taken in? And then another crypto job came my way about something completely different. And I just found that I was reading more and more about it and going further and further down this rabbit hole, as a metaphor people very frequently use in this space, that you just get kind of sucked in like a big black hole into all this information and fascination. And I just found out that I was going way above and beyond the requirements of any particular freelance gig to find out more about this stuff because it was fascinating. And then I ended up basically specializing by accident in writing about this stuff because it is quite interesting niche, and all the knowledge kind of accumulates, and you find you can go and research something because you know where the information lies and who to talk to. And I realized I'd really been writing about nothing else.
Interesting.
And I was okay with that.
No, that's quite fascinating, actually. So for people that maybe don't know what exactly it is, how do you describe what kind of blockchain and all the stuff you write about is actually kind of about?
Right. Well, lots of people, probably like I was a year or so ago, were vaguely aware that Bitcoin was this kind of digital currency that sort of got a physical manifestation, but it was all online, it was all digital, and probably had something to do with drug dealing or terrorism or lots of unsavory associations. And really, I knew nothing about the blockchain technology that powered it, along with other technologies. But the fascinating thing about blockchain is, for me, I think it ties back to the original work I once did in community development, the kind of inclusiveness and transparency of it. And that's very unscientific, but there's something very quite noble about it in a way, the way of making data accountable and tamper evident, if not tamper proof. And that means that you can send value from one side of the world to the other in a transaction because it's copied to it's like a big database really with lots of copies, and there are lots of different metaphors and analogies people use to describe it. One is if you've ever edited something like a Google document or a Google sheet, if you like, that lots of people are editing at the same time, and you can actually see other people writing in it. But imagine if that was the Bitcoin protocol, that would be, say, 900 nodes contributing to that simultaneously, or 9,000. And each time somebody adds a row, it's there forever, and the next one goes in underneath it, and the next one goes in underneath it, but everybody can see it.
Interesting way to describe it. I think it makes total sense.
So there's this distributed ledger that is continually updated and pushed out around the world. And the power of that is sort of deceptively simple. Obviously, it's not just blockchain that powers cryptocurrency. There's also some very advanced cryptography as well to make sure that those transactions end up in the right place. And there's this whole kind of change coming in the economy. And I realized that a lot of the projects I was being asked to write about, they weren't really about Bitcoin or the ones that you've heard of. They were about some very innovative projects going on in the space. There are some amazing things happening. Some of the brightest minds I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
They're trying to solve some of the biggest problems in the world. Some amazingly intelligent people with some amazingly disruptive ideas, and they are going to change the world. The only problem is sometimes they're not very good at explaining to normal people how those ideas are going to change the world for them. So that's where I feel that my space in life lies, is telling those stories, being able to come in and translate from people whose first language might not be English, or their first language might be code of some kind, but they have this vision, and it's going to transform some very specific problem in life, and then being able to tell that story and bring it out into the world. So that was where I found myself about 6 months ago.
Interesting.
Actually, it was slightly longer than that. I think this year is just whizzing.
I know, it's going
good sign, I think.
Yeah,
I realized people wanted more. They didn't just, my specialism is long form storytelling, article and press and so on. But I was finding clients that were working and seeking funding particularly needed a broader range of marketing communication. So that was when I decided I needed to bite the bullet and put together a team in order to deliver. Having loved freelancing and the flexibility of that, it's actually great to be working with some fantastic people again and putting together a team of specialists in social media, in press, actually getting things out to journalists and infiltrating traditional media bit by bit, slowly, and starting to tell the stories of these amazing startups and what they're doing.
Sure. And that's BlockSparks, right?
That's BlockSparks. Yep.
No, interesting. Yeah, I think just to kind of echo what you said, as kind of somebody that's kind of been on the technical side of things, and I don't really consider myself a very good writer, sometimes it's really, really challenging, because as a technical person, sometimes you either talk over people's heads, or you talk kind of like down to them because you simplify it too much, and trying to figure out with it, like, especially if you meet somebody, you meet somebody for the first time, you have like almost like seconds to gauge kind of where you think their technical expertise is or isn't.
Yes.
And if you start kind of talking to them, if you misguess that
in either direction,
you can offend somebody so fast, and like you don't mean to, but it's interesting, right?
It is, because I think the world is just becoming so niched, and so that there's so much knowledge in the world. I mean, I would love it if I'd lived 200 or 300 years ago, and an educated person in the Renaissance would have been expected to be generally educated about everything. You would have the whole world's knowledge about poetry and languages and astronomy and everything if you were a reasonably sort of middle class, traveled, probably a man. Whereas nowadays, nobody can be like that. Nobody can know everything there is to know about everything. We all have these little tiny, narrower and narrower spheres of interest and knowledge, and just trying to connect those things up. It's a great place to be operating, but it has a lot of challenges. And as you say, you can misjudge it. And you've got to make these snap judgments about people. And I suppose we do it all the time, just in general conversation when you meet somebody. I mean, for me, it starts with, so what is it you actually do? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's the same. I mean, my other half works in IT customer support, and he has to make the same evaluations instantly when someone presents with a problem, as to, is this a high-level user who's managed to find some obscure bug, or is this somebody who hasn't plugged it in right? And to try and resolve that problem in a couple of questions, at the very beginning of the conversation, so you're not giving completely wrong and potentially very patronizing or offensive advice.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I could do that every day.
No,
like,
I couldn't do that.
It's just not for me, but I think that's one of the hardest jobs to do, because not everybody's happy with with what's happening, right? When they reach out to support, sometimes they are not happy.
And sometimes they don't frame questions well,
yeah,
good at asking for what they need and so on. No, I'm really lucky because I get to do this in writing slowly and in a considered way.
Fair enough.
And then edit it before anybody reads it. So yes, a great respect to people who can do it live.
So I'm curious, though, to dive into some of the stuff that you've written about recently. Do you maybe want to kind of talk about some of the recent articles you've written and kind of why you kind of wrote about them?
Sure, yes. I mean, I do a lot of blogging for clients, ways to kind of develop their platforms and what they're doing. We have some clients I can talk about openly, others where kind of they're kept secret, because there's a lot of very sensitive intellectual property around in this space, as you will appreciate. There's one client we've been working for a while now, who are now post-ICO, and they're about to launch a distributed cryptocurrency exchange.
Interesting.
That's a lovely project because their values are very much aligned with my own personally. They're very inclusive and accessible. They're trying to create an on-ramp into crypto for people from all over the world. There are lots of currencies where I think we take it for granted that if you've got US dollars or sterling or euros, it's fairly easy to access this stuff, as it is to access most financial services. But if you've got a rather more obscure currency, it's almost impossible to use the typical on-ramps that we find. So they've created a peer-to-peer exchange where anybody can connect with anybody, like a sort of eBay of cryptocurrency dealing. So
interesting.
They're launching literally within the next week, so that'll be really exciting. But I get to write about all sorts of things for them, not just about their product. For example, I wrote something recently about how cryptocurrency can really impact financial inclusion globally. And all those things we do take for granted in the developed world, like access to credit, access to sending payments, remittances. There's a fundamental lack of fairness in the whole thing, where the less you have to start with, the more expensive and difficult it is to access financial services. And so much of the world remains unbanked or underbanked. Even in developed countries, there are large proportions of people who largely invisible in Europe and the US who don't have access to those kind of services because of problems with credit or problems with their address or their, the lack of stability in their lives. And so crypto has the potential to change that and let people reestablish lines of credit, build reputation on other factors, even establish digital identities, for people who are displaced from where they were born. People may have lost touch with the traditional infrastructure that we take for granted till we lose it, I think, if we're privileged enough to be born in the first world and have access to all this stuff. So I think, obviously, I don't try to be naive about it. There are lots of interests who don't want to see the world disrupted to that extent. But I think there is, for the first time in my lifetime that I can think of, real potential to do things differently. So I love getting to write about stuff like that.
Yeah, it's actually quite fascinating, right? Because it almost levels the playing field a little bit, right? Like, if not saying it probably will never happen, but like if there was just like one global digital currency that was the kind of go-to, because like I think, and people would probably argue this, but like for just pick the US dollar, for example. Most places on the planet, if you pull out a US dollar, they will take it.
Yeah.
I actually had an experience when I was in Mexico a number of years ago, where we were in a small town and they wouldn't take US currency, but that was like the, for argument's sake, but like if there was one currency that you could just use kind of everywhere globally, is actually really quite fascinating, right?
It
like
is, isn't it?
Just the implications of that.
Yeah. That must have been quite a shock for you in Mexico to come across that, because it is so universal. If you get paid in US dollars, the thought that they might not be universally welcome is something that you don't typically encounter or have to consider in your day-to-day life at all. Whereas if you get paid in Venezuelan bolivars or Zimbabwe dollars, something like that, it's a part of your everyday life to think, is there, how can I manage my way through this situation? You have to think about life completely differently. And it is very hard for us all to understand. I suppose the only way to think about it is if we go back sort of a couple hundred years. I sound like some kind of Renaissance professor.
No, it's good. I like it.
There was a time when gold was the global reserve currency, and actually you can pretty much travel and transact anywhere on the planet with gold. And knowledge, trade traveled freely. Okay, traveled quite slowly. You could send a digital transaction. Sure. You had to get on a boat somewhere with your spices or whatever. But actually, the whole world pretty much had a standard point of valuation. And nowadays, the US dollar is regarded as the global reserve currency. But a great many people think that Bitcoin has the potential to become that as we move further and further away from trusting fiat currencies, which basically only have their value by decree of a government and state. And as our trust in those institutions continues to decline, more in some countries than others, but globally on the whole, then there could be some big changes ahead.
Yeah, no, it's quite fascinating to me. The one piece that we should maybe talk about that I found really quite fascinating is you have this article that you wrote recently, kind of it's up on LinkedIn, and that like, why would an honest person need a privacy coin? And do you want to maybe kind of talk about what you cover in that piece and why you decided to write about that? Because I think it's quite fascinating, actually.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency that people think it's completely anonymous. And actually it isn't. And one thing I try to avoid actually having to pronounce the word pseudonymous on a podcast. Made me say it, so I'm not going to say it twice.
Sorry.
It's not really anonymous. What pseudonymous means is that it can be reverse engineered, and actually it's possible to, with a little bit of forensic examination, you can quite often track exactly what those bits of code mean, or at least you can aggregate certain information about them. And I think in this big data world that we live in, it's easy to forget that actually there are people, whether they're trying to get you to reveal your bank password or whatever, who are quite good at putting different bits of information together out of huge data sets and trying to socially engineer their way into your Facebook account or your bank account or whatever. So we think of Bitcoin as anonymous. It isn't. And there are people, that's how they were able to catch various people who've distributed malware, people who've tried to bribe people who've held people to ransom. People think Bitcoin is anonymous when it isn't. The reason I think it's interesting is that privacy is so much in the public eye at the moment. I think we're having to really rethink privacy as a world in 2018 because of the way that data moves and travels and is bought and sold. Whether it's Zuckerberg appearing before the Senate and trying to explain how social media works to people from another century who are the ones making the rules about this stuff that affect us all, wherever we are in the world. And then at the same time, you've got huge companies like Equifax just losing shed loads of data, and all those people's details are compromised. And there have been other huge breaches in the UK recently, where like tens of millions of customer records lost. And the companies involved say, well, nobody suffered any financial loss, so we don't have to pay any compensation or really do anything except apologize. And even under new legislation in Europe with GDPR, the fines amount to little more than a slap on the wrist for really big players. It doesn't seem to make them take people's data more seriously and more carefully. So I think privacy is something that we all have a natural right to. And it shouldn't be a case of, well, if you want privacy, it's because you're doing something bad or illegal or secret.
Yeah,
I think that's the problem, that it's easy for regulators to turn around and say, well, you must have something to hide if privacy is a big deal to you. But actually, I think privacy should be the norm. It should be the natural state of where individuals, our thoughts are.
You should have the choice.
Yeah, we should. And there are lots of blockchain projects opening up that choice in fascinating ways. There's one project we've been talking to recently who is aggregating a lot of scientific research into aging and longevity. And so they're looking at putting medical records on the blockchain, but then giving the people who those records are about complete sovereignty over them, so they could decide, well, actually, I want to open up that record to this particular research project because what they're doing,
sure,
I believe in it, or it might help me, or it might help, somebody I'll never meet to. If you have an unusual disease, for example, you're actually very rare and important from a data point of view, and you should be able to monetize that effectively, rather than lots of research studies now, you take part in it and effectively the drug company funding the study then owns that information. You don't, even though it's about health data. So I think there's sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, but even something as simple as the fact of like, sure, you can use it to actually give that data away or parts of the data away to like research, but like you could also give it to other family members or caretakers or your doctor, but you could also give it to them for a limited period of time. Like you can say, okay, like I'm in the hospital for 2 weeks, let all the staff at the hospital and the doctors access my data. And then 3 weeks from now, they don't have access to it anymore.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you could potentially just like gatekeep your own data if you choose to.
If you actually own that data, then you can have complete control, because in 8 years on the other side of the world, you're admitted to another hospital for something related, then you should be able to say, right, you need the records from this period of my life. And at the moment, there's no way of doing that, and even things like a record from your dentist, which might signify something quite important about the state of your heart. For example, these records are very rarely conjoined, and it's information about you and you own it, but at the moment it's in different people's databases. You have no control over it. You have no control over how it's used, whether it's used to make your life insurance more expensive and things like that.
Sure.
And it certainly doesn't benefit you in any way. I think recently there's been a bit of a revelation about how some of these genetic companies are using personal data.
Interesting.
They put these vast databases together. Yeah, I signed up for it. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I've got a mixed race family, and it's amazing to see sort of that it's more mixed than I realized it. It's like, wow, where did that bit come from? And it's really interesting. But I know I don't own that data. I know that the company behind it and monetizing it in various ways. I hope some of it's doing some good on a scientific front, but I'm sure a lot of it's just making lots of money for somebody. I would love to be able to have that on a more blockchain permission basis and have more say over it.
Or getting a kickback from it, right?
Yeah, that might be nice. I haven't got anything rare or interesting, I don't think, in my
Well, you never know though, right? Like the thing that I keep thinking about, and obviously we're so far away from it, but like if you had all the data since kind of the day you were born about like everything, right? Like personally, professionally, your medical history, your DNA, everything, right? Like, and you could kind of decide how that was used almost like from your phone, for example, right? Like, and you could just, okay, you need access to my dental records. Here's everything since the day I was born. Or here's my, like you said, medical history because I'm in a hospital in another country that I'm traveling to. And like, they can have access to everything like for that day, or maybe it's just on your phone or something, right? Like having that, your data at kind of your fingertips is really quite fascinating to me. I know that scares some people, but I think like, I like that stuff, right? Like, I think that's kind of fascinating.
It requires a complete rethink, though, of what that data is, who owns it, who has an interest in it. And people don't see the value in it. There's an upmarket supermarket chain in the UK, and my mum has the loyalty card for it. And the deal is, with this loyalty card, you can have a free cup of coffee whenever you go along and do a shop or spend over a certain amount. And she was blown away by this. Oh, this is fantastic. I can go and do my shopping. Then I just put the shopping in the car. Then I can go and have a free coffee. And we had a long conversation about how expensive that coffee really is, what that coffee is actually worth. It's basically, it's a very self-selecting set because it's an expensive supermarket of valuable consumer data that builds over years. It's trends about so many products, about so many ingredient types, about seasonal data, even what kind of credit card you use to buy it with, what the size of your shop. I mean, the insight there, the value for the firm is so incredibly deep as far as consumer insight goes, that coffee, that's nothing compared to what they're getting out of it. And I think until people start to see that they are the product in this situation, you know, the coffee doesn't go anywhere near it. People don't start to take ownership of it. It's, you know, it's in the same way that people are surprised to hear that Facebook is flogging their data left and right. Really, I know. This shouldn't surprise you. You've given all this free coffee because you can share your photos, you can make friends, you can join groups, you can do this and that. Until people start asking themselves, well, how's that being paid for? You know, where's the money in all this? And people don't think like that. There's another project we're involved with, which is about air travel rewards, which is, again, so, you know, a very affluent consumer subset, people who fly regularly. And for some reason, it seems really difficult for them to get meaningful rewards and actually be able to use their points for something like a free flight, which they actually want. So this is a project just to aggregate all of that data, but again, to make the user central to it and their experience, and not just to bring together the points plans from all different airlines by means of a crypto token so they can be intertraded, which is a really exciting idea. But it's the fact that the consumer might have a choice in that and might be able to say, well, actually, yeah, I earned these miles over there, but I want to use them over here. And this is what I want to gain from it. And also that I might choose to unlock some of my behavior as a consumer to help in research, but that I will get rewarded for that and I will earn additional points for being part of those studies.
Yeah, no, it's quite fascinating. The other thing that I find fascinating about, like, just to go back to your grocery store example, like, if you could control the data that they're using about you to actually benefit you, and I think the simplest example is if you have their loyalty card and you run their app, and you have like a food allergy or something, and it can suggest kind of meals for you or new products or products to buy that, you know, you can eat with your food allergy, you would probably more likely openly give some of your data away for the convenience of that. You might, right?
Absolutely. And that's where your idea of a universal personal blockchain comes in, that information could be put together without compromising your personal identity. Maybe the supermarket could even warn you, hey, that thing you're about to buy, that processed food, you know that has ingredient X in it.
Exactly, right?
And we know about it.
And so I guess, like, I like kind of talking about some of the bad stuff, but I also like talking about some of the conveniences that, you know, all this stuff could provide for us, because I think in a lot of cases, it doesn't always have to be used for kind of evil, I guess, is maybe the bad way of putting it, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, you know, it's a deep philosophical point. Profit, I don't believe, is evil. I think lack of transparency about it is
that's fair.
Quite deceptive and disingenuous. I think prosperity is something that we all need to aspire to. Prosperity is what keeps the world peaceful and making progress and lets us all sleep at night in worlds that aren't at war or wondering where the next meal's coming from. So let's not profit, but let's try and kind of encourage an openness about it and an education so that people realize what they're getting into when they whiz through a privacy update and just click I agree at the end, because they're not going to read 47 pages of dense small print explaining what was going to happen to their data. That doesn't work. And, you know, for all the new laws in Europe about privacy that's supposed to make privacy by design more central, I think all it's done is make people write longer and longer policy documents that no one's ever going to read.
Interesting. I was actually going to ask you about that. I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, because I was going to, obviously, like, most of my listeners are in kind of North America and a bit beyond. And obviously I don't live in that part of the world. So yeah, you don't think it's really changed much? Because I know over here, at least, like, a lot of companies were kind of scrambling to get something up for that. But it hasn't really changed anything on your end. At least you haven't seen anything major other than more policies so far anyway?
I think there was an awful flurry in the last couple of weeks before the act went into place by people who weren't quite sure where their mailing lists had come from and if they'd been properly opted in. So there was this mad cascade of emails saying, please just check this box so that we can prove we've got permission to email you. And often those weren't necessary at all, or if they were necessary, then they didn't have permission to send you the email to ask if it was necessary. And there was a lot of misunderstanding highlighted there, I think, as to how you were ever opted in the first place. But an awful lot of people seem to have stopped there, and there's so much more to privacy by design. And I think what a lot of people sometimes forget is these big high-profile breaches, the likes of Equifax and so on, they're not generally as a result of somebody doing something deliberately malicious from within the organization. Someone saying, I'm sell all these records. They're external penetration, and the huge fines come about because people's information security isn't up to scratch, or their staff training. People aren't aware to notice when somebody's probing them for information, or little bits of information they'll aggregate in order to perform an attack. So it's really, it's not about kind of deliberate people saying, I'm going to steal this information and sell it. It's about people falling victim to things that the regulators rightly believe they should be able to prevent by better awareness. And it's that lack of awareness that worries me. I don't think it's massively changed. And it isn't a European thing, because there's so few record sets now that you can say are all about one part of the world.
Yeah,
like that.
Interesting.
You know, I think every mailing list, it's almost impossible to say. If you have a mailing list of 5 figures or up, I think it would be very hard to say to a regulator, I can prove there's not a single European citizen in there, so this doesn't apply to me. And I think this is one reason why we're going to have to see more convergence of regulation, whether it's about data or about cryptocurrency and, you know, ICO funding and things like that is so fragmented at the moment that people think, well, I'll do it from this jurisdiction. We'll set up a company over there. Or we'll say that this token sale isn't open to US residents, for example. But then actually, you know, it's pretty easy for people to get around those things.
Yeah.
Maybe as simply as using a VPN. And then whose problem is it if it does turn out that that's an illegal security sale in the end, you know, made to a US citizen, for example? So I think there's a more shaky down to come.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. And I was actually watching an interview the other day with a big kind of security name. And he was basically saying, if you're looking to be like an ethical hacker and kind of actually help companies kind of fight some of these, you know, making sure that systems and stuff are as secure as possible, that basically the job market, like if you understand it even a little bit, you can get a job. Like the unemployment rate in the security market for basically the foreseeable future will be 0%. Yes. Like you will have a job, which is really kind of interesting to me. Like I always knew that, you know, there's such a shortage of people, but like when he put it as simple as like, look, like for decades, probably the rest of our lifetime, you will always be with a job because it's only getting worse. Like it's not getting better. As more and more things move online, more and more things become open, more and more things, you know, just are going to be hacked, right? And if you can work good or bad, right, you'll be without, you'll always have a job. And hopefully, you know, maybe people don't go the bad route.
Well, yes, I was going to say it's not just ethical hackers, unfortunately. There are 2 career paths there. And there's probably more crossover between them than we realize. I'm sure there's a lot of cases of, you know, people making deals when they're finally caught and actually going.
Sure. But the interesting thing about it was his point was also like, sure, obviously like you can pick the, you know, kind of bad black hat kind of bad side of hacking. But his point was like, yeah, you can go that route, but you can make just as much money, if not more money, being kind of on the good side as well.
Yes.
And I didn't really kind of, I don't know, I guess it's kind of historically been a little bit the other way around. And I think it's kind of changing now. So I'm not telling people to like pick a side, but like, I think if you're going to look into it as a career, you can make a really good living kind of being an ethical hacker now.
Yeah,
right? And the security side of thing is only growing, and you will basically have a job for the rest of your life. I don't quote me on that, but you know, it's that low of you know, unemployment.
Thanks for listening to Building the Future. This show is heard by more than 1 million people monthly in over 15 markets worldwide, including Silicon Valley. Kevin Horick's guests are leading business owners, successful entrepreneurs, and merchandisers worldwide. Now, your brand has an opportunity to tap into this dedicated and active group of business people who are looking for places to invest and the right opportunities to support. Find out how you can get involved at buildingthefutureshow.com.
We're not going to fix this as a problem.
No.
You know, it doesn't matter. It's an arms race, basically, because there will always be the bad side taking the risks and the rewards that go along with that. So the people who want to protect stuff are going to have to keep the same level of investment and rewards for their key people to match that in order to attract people back. And, other perks of the job, like not likely to go to jail and things like that, are obviously attractive to people too, but they're going to have to make sure that they're attracting that talent. And whilst the actual roles will move, I think the whole future of work thing is really fascinating, and how jobs are going to change, and everybody's panicking about robots going to take their jobs and so on. But there are some areas that are going to grow so much, whether that's we have a shortage of blockchain engineers, we have a shortage of information security people. We're going to have shortages of people who can actually mend plumbing and things like that, because people who can actually fix things with their hands. And as a parent of teenagers now, I see them still being prepared by the school systems for jobs that barely exist now. They certainly won't in 5 or 10 years' time. And really, they should be being taught how to hack. They should be being taught how to protect themselves. They should be being taught how to code, which is still a niche thing. They should be being taught how to use maths properly, useful maths like probability and budgeting, and instead of how to resolve triangle dimensions. And
I was going to say, since I've been out of high school, I think I've never had to find the circumference of,
No, I haven't used that one for a while either, I must say. Whereas, you get people coming out with their maths degrees and then they'll still see them buying a lottery ticket because they don't understand the basic law of odds, and why you might as well just stuff your money straight down the toilet and flush it. But they're allowed to invest in that, but they're not allowed to invest in cryptocurrency projects.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Yeah, interesting. I never compared the two, but you're right. They're it's kind of the same thing, right? Like at a basic level.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a change in how we learn and share information, and how people go on learning. The interesting thing for me now is how easy it is to learn new stuff, having ended up switching careers when I did and going into a completely new area. One thing I love about it is that it's new, and that everybody's new, nobody's
you can't be an expert at something that's been out for like a couple of years.
No, it's brilliant. And so there is a really nice kind of lack of ego about it. Of course, there are gurus and egos, and there are a few of those. But for the most part, people are just really keen to share, keen to help each other, keen to share their fascination with whatever they're working on in a very enabling and helpful way. And that's wonderful. And I think the fast movingness of it, the way it's all getting fragmented into so many different possibilities, and the way that people get behind their projects and get really excited about them is great. And so, nobody can say, I've been a blockchain guru for 30 years, because we know they're lying. Mind you, somebody told me the other day, crypto years are like dog years. So,
right. Okay.
We all do have lengthy generation spanning careers already, some of us. I don't know.
Sure. Speaking of kind of sharing, you're about to launch kind of a podcast. What exactly are you going to talk about in the podcast, and have you picked a name for it yet?
We have. It's probably going to be launching within the next few weeks, but it's very different to the client work we're doing. Because we're working with these amazing projects who are changing the world and so on, we know that the one thing that will serve all of those clients best is to bring more people into the crypto ecosystem. And it's something that I feel very strongly about personally, that people need to know about this stuff, not at the high level geeky level, or even the will you fund us level, but just how do I buy stuff with crypto? How do I own a little bit of this currency where there's only going to be 21 million of them ever, and they're all going to get sold. So what we're going to launch is, we'll see how it goes, but we want to start telling stories at a much more fundamental level and explaining to people what blockchain is, how to keep themselves safe. I spent so long in consumer research. I'm very, very aware that it's difficult at the moment, and that if you make a mistake, you can lose a lot of money. So I want to come at this more from a consumer finance advice point of view. Obviously, won't be giving financial advice. We're very clear about that. There'll be disclaimers at the end of every session. But I want people to feel a little bit empowered to understand this stuff, to realize that to use it, you don't have to be a blockchain engineer in the same way that you don't have to be a computer engineer to use Facebook. there are lots of people working on tools to make things far more accessible to users. And
it's getting better almost weekly, right?
It is getting better, yes. And there's lots of debate in the crypto sphere as comparing crypto to the early internet. And people say, are we in 1988 or are we actually sort of in 2001 or whatever? But things are changing very rapidly. And so what I want to do is just create a podcast for people. It's called Crypto Confidence. And it's going to deal with some very, very basic concepts. It'll be interesting to see how it goes, because it's something that people shouldn't listen to for years. Hopefully people will quickly outgrow us and move on, if they're interested in this sphere, to one of the many excellent in-depth podcasts in the area where they go into the technology in far more detail.
Very cool. I think a simple example, and it's probably loosely related, but I think the best example that I've kind of given people before is, if you use the Starbucks app that you load with your credit card or your bank account, and you just scan your phone, you're basically using a cryptocurrency. It's like Starbucks' currency, right? And I know it's a very simplified version of it, and probably somebody that actually really understands Bitcoin would say no, you're completely wrong. But if you think about you take a currency of yours and you give it to a company, and then that currency is kind of converted to their currency, and then you use it to buy things. Sure, you can only use your Starbucks card at Starbucks, but and I was reading an article, they were saying Starbucks is basically the biggest cryptocurrency right now, or digital currency, because it's kind of used in so many countries. Or another example is even iTunes. You give Apple, you have this iTunes credit, right? Yeah. Now it's an Apple currency, right? And you can use your iPhone to pay. And it's a very, very simple kind of examples of, I think, what people can kind of at least start to understand, right? It's not really a cryptocurrency, but it's the closest thing that I think the non-technical person can understand. Okay, I can start to see what you're kind of getting at.
And I think it helps people conceptualize the idea of digital money, because one of the things people say about cryptocurrency is, well, it has no physical form. It's not tangible. I can't see a dollar bill or a 20 euro note or something. And so, well, actually, how much of your money do you actually have in stacks of bills at the moment? Most of your assets are probably completely digital anyway, whether they're in the forms of traditional currency, or whether they're converted into store card loyalty points, or something you can only use to get coffee. Or I suppose in terms of things like iTunes and store loyalty, you could say they're like stable coins, because they have a definite peg against the fiat currency of their nation. They're not freely traded. But apart from that, they are basically purely digital currencies. But then much of the currency that we have is your bank. You have a big stack of notes corresponding to the amount you deposited, and if you borrow, they create that money out of nowhere via fractional reserve banking, and most of the money doesn't exist anyway. That's a bit scary, but that's the kind of concept we want to talk about in Crypto Confidence, just to explain. Maybe you should trust crypto more, because real money is such a fabrication anyway. I mean, we're not trying to make everybody run home and put tinfoil over their heads and hide under the bed, but just to make people a little bit more aware of the things that we can take for granted if we've never lived in an economy that's collapsed.
It's interesting,
where there are people who've literally lost access to their savings and their banking overnight, and there are certainly other parts of the world where this is happening now. And if we've never faced that, we've never really thought how fragile the whole thing is, and that there are alternatives, whether that's investing in resources like gold or oil, or whether it's maybe having some of your assets in a new kind of currency that people aren't familiar with yet. We want to just demystify things a bit, give people a chance to think about it, question it, find out more, find the right questions to ask, the right resources to follow. We're not going to be financial advisors, and I'm never going to be a blockchain engineer. I'm never going to try to explain it on that level. I read a lot about this stuff. I did. There's a brilliant course by the University of Nicosia that do a free at a MOOC, a massive online certificate thingy. It's great, and it's free, and they're about to start again in September. And I did that earlier this year, which brought a lot of my technical knowledge up to scratch a little bit. It certainly took me out of my comfort zone, but it's on that kind of level of just, they found some very good metaphors of explaining things. And sometimes I think Bitcoin and blockchain was invented by geeks for geeks. So
yeah, sure.
terminology, it's just not very helpful. Even things like mining as a concept, we need better words for it. You know, your digital wallet isn't actually a wallet at all. It's more like a keychain. And I think if we can just explain things a bit better, maybe that's where BlockSparks as storytellers can come in and do a job on kind of helping bridge that gap for normal, everyday people. Again, as we were saying earlier, not to talk down to people or assume that they don't have the capacity to understand this, but just to find accessible analogues and metaphors, make it real for people in terms of their everyday lives and make them think, well, actually, I could choose to invest in a little bit of this or dabble a little bit, or I might just want to discover more about it first, but now I know where to go and what to look for. So that's what we're hoping to do with Crypto Confidence.
No, I think that's great, because I think part of the problem with some of this stuff is most people don't really understand it, but most people are also scared to say they don't really understand it, and especially like kind of socially, right?
Yeah.
At least I've kind of found, and it's like, well, no, there's nothing wrong with you not really understanding, because I think most people don't understand and most people have the same questions as you. So if they have a podcast like yours where they could just go learn some stuff about this without other people knowing that they didn't know it before they listened to your podcast. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And we, you know, the intention is to create, even if it's going to be a regular fortnightly show, to have it, it's pretty evergreen stuff that people will be able to, we'll create some detailed show notes that are in depth, so people can, if they really want to know about something that we spoke about months ago, hopefully it will still be relevant and accessible, and we'll answer those questions. And I hope we'll have questions coming in from our audience as well, the kind of questions that we're already dealing with individually, socially, and or online. It'd be nice to bring those together and try and explain for a wider audience.
No, I think that's great. But we're coming to the end of the show, so maybe let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and check out the podcast when it's ready.
Sure, yes. We have secured CryptoConfPod as a Twitter handle,
nice.
Which isn't very kind of elegantly tripping off the tongue, but we've got that. And obviously we're at BlockSparks for the main BlockSparks account. We are blocksparks.io is our home online. Again, there's not a huge amount of content there, but you can find out the kind of work we're doing for clients and our own blog, the things that we're interested in and writing about there. I'm always glad to connect with people on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to come and talk about any of this crypto stuff, or you've got a project idea, I'm always glad to connect people to other people in the space as well, and try and work out who might be good to talk to somebody else as we get to know this space and the players in it. So please get in touch.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com, and keep building the future.